Welcome everybody for this series of instructions on the Moonbeams of Mahamudra. Moonbeams of Mahamudra, a text by Dakpo Tashi Namgyal, translated by Elizabeth Callahan. And I would like to give you in this series of teaching an overview about the structure of the book. So these videos propose themselves to be study videos, not so much meditation videos. The idea is to give you an easy entry into the study of this book. So when I think of what I want to explain to you, then I think that you are going to read here the major part of this book, which is the translation of this Tibetan text, and that with my short instructions you have it a little bit easier to read. You might also find some inspiration and clarification in there. 4 years ago, when we founded the Ekayana Institute, I decided that I wanted to give the instructions, the complete instructions on this book, and we have already done a number of courses on them, 8 days each, with full day instructions. And the reason is that this book gives a complete explanation of what we call Mahamudra, the Great Seal, the instructions on the nature of mind practiced in the Kagyu tradition. And I have to specify, yes, Mahamudra is also practiced in the Gelug and Sakya tradition, 2 other major traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. And here, in this text, then, Dakpo Tashi Namgyal gives the instructions for the Kagyu tradition. And I only learned the contents of this book after I had myself already done the 2 3-year retreats. And our teacher, Genyo Rinpoche, said to us, well, he would like very much that we, the lamas, the teachers, study this text in detail so that we would know the background, what is behind the oral instructions of the Mahamudra meditation masters. The explanation of the background actually shows the structure and the reasons and the difficulties encountered in teaching Mahamudra. When setting out to teach this in public, of course, then I followed a style where I would give some sentence-to-sentence explanations of the whole book, but interspersed with meditations. Now in this video, I will not do guided meditations. I will simply give these instructions in a very condensed way, giving overviews of every chapter of the book. Actually, this teaching here of Dakpo Tashi Namgyal was written down before the famous 9th Karmapa work, The Ocean of True Meaning, of Definite Meaning, which exists in 2 English translations, or other important meditation manuals of the Mahamudra transmission. And before this time, before the 16th century when this text was written, the Mahamudra transmission, although it was written down, was principally an oral tradition. Because it was only around this time in Tibet that the xylographic printing, the printing with wood prints, appeared. And only then these texts, they spread widely to the different monasteries. It was before then, it was a very rare thing to have these wood prints, and they were beginning to spread more and more during this time. And so my personal teaching lineage is actually this Mahamudra as it is being explained in this book, and this is a very comprehensive outline. And it is my wish to share this with students, with those who are motivated, and I'm surprised that in the past years so many of you have followed these teachings regularly. So I want to make it easier also for newcomers to enter this curriculum. And recently, while we were already in the study course, then this translation has appeared, the English translation. And this is what we use as a basic reference together with the Tibetan, which I consult as well. And I was actually in the process of preparing a German translation myself. But now Judith Debelov from the Ranjung Yeshe Institute in Nepal, together with a team of translators, is continuing the German translation. And I have abandoned correcting the French translation, which was the earliest one appearing by Christian Charrier, also a student of Geno Rinpoche, who translated this book from Tibetan into French. But a lot of rewording was necessary, so I had started to revise the French translation, which right now is not necessary because we have this good English translation. The translator, Elizabeth Callahan, has herself done 2-3-year retreats. She has fully received the transmission. She knows what she is talking about. So, except for choice of words, one does not really have to discuss the translation. The translation is very reliable, and I encourage you to study that. Also, for your study, because this is now going to be a study outline, you will find in our media library, you will find the German transcripts of the teaching, plus the German audios, the French audios, and the English audios of all the teachings so far, where I go through this text sentence by sentence. So, if you follow this video now, the best is you have the book already at hand, because I will also be following this book to make the study easier. And Elizabeth Callahan has written a very nice introduction to this book. I'm now referring to the pages 29 to 38 of this book, of this introduction. And this is where, when you read carefully through, I'm not going to repeat the contents. You will find, first of all, an introduction into Mahamudra. Mahamudra, what is actually Mahamudra? The Great Seal. And actually, it's a term that appeared in India. It might have appeared as early as the 2nd or 3rd century after Christ, maybe a little bit later. And it refers to an approach of practice where one meditates on the nature of mind, on just how the mind is. And this practice does not depend on developing side practices or supportive practices like a tantric approach with mantra recitation, with visualizations, is that it does not even necessarily depend on having to calm one's mind to develop deep absorptions of shamatha, of mental calm. It does depend, however, on one's capacity to open up into the center of the experience. So there are traditional ways of presenting Mahamudra, and the way that has developed in the Kagyu tradition to present Mahamudra depends largely on one crucial master called Gampopa, who lived more than 400 years before Dakwatashi Namgyal. And Gampopa was a holder of the Mahamudra tradition, including all the explanations of the sutras, the teachings of the Buddha in the Mahayana sutras, as well as of the Tantric tradition. And he was also exposed to the lineage of, you can say, pointing out instructions, straightforward pointing out instructions of the great realized ones of India, starting with Sarvabhauma and many others, pointing directly to the nature of mind, to help gifted students to directly look into their mind and realize their mind without any other intermediary practices. So with Gampopa actually starts something in Tibet, a new approach, which was not unknown in India, but was not so much practiced. Actually, Gampopa would select the students according to their capacities, and to some he would give mainly the graduated teachings, progressive teachings, on how to develop mental calm, how to then, inside the experience of mental calm, to look more closely into the nature of the experiences arising, develop insight, vipassana, and then how to dwell in that insight, which would be properly called then Mahamudra. Mahamudra practice is resting in the insight. And to many of his students, he would also teach tantric practices to make it easier to relax, full of confidence, into the nature of one's own mind. But also, to some, and at certain points to all of them, he would give the oral pointing out instructions where he would just directly talk about the mind as it is and indicate with words and symbolic means the nature of mind. So a kind of shortcut. And these two approaches to teaching Mahamudra, the gradual, progressive approach and the direct pointing out instructions, since the time of Gampopa, they would mix in the Kagyu tradition. And depending on situations, the teachers would decide what the student needs, what would be helpful right now. And even in my own case with Genyo Rinpoche, then those very fond of the pointing out instructions, they would often be indicated a way of going the gradual path to not forget that one needs to lay foundations, one needs to practice preliminaries, how to open up the mind, how to develop more confidence. And then again, give the pointing out instruction. Because a pointing out instruction is only as good as the capacity of the disciple to understand it. So there are many books nowadays giving a summary of pointing out instructions, but there are very few readers or listeners who really understand them. And this is due to a lack of preparation of one's mind. The mind is just not able to relax enough. Now, with this series of teachings on Mahamudra spread out over years, I'm planning to spread this out over 7 or 8 years. We have done 3.5 years already. Then I hope that those of you who are motivated, that you practice intensively at home. And yes, it is possible to practice this path without relying on tantric practices, but it has been seen also in my experience, although I'm a great fan of just simple practice of being, of silent meditation, without complications, then the preliminaries and the tantric practices, they help enormously to understand Mahamudra. But in these teachings now, I will not talk about the tantric aspect, the Vajrayana aspect of the Mahamudra teachings, but only go with Dakputashi Namgyal through the instructions on mind. Now the idea is with these teachings to reduce your hesitation to study the book personally, to give you some guidance for each chapter. I would like to have a little summary here. I would like to give you a little overview of the book so that with every video you can take this as an introduction to the chapter that I'm referring to. And then you can study the chapter personally and perhaps you see the video another time. And you will find these outlines of my talk, you will find them in the Ekayana Media Library together with the link to this teaching. Also, I would love that some of you who want to participate in the curriculum, that you can catch up with the explanations to join us next year, if possible. And my idea is to point to the essentials of every chapter so that you will not get lost in details, because this book is a big comprehensive description and one might not see the forest because of the trees, of too many trees. You know, it's like a German saying which means you don't see the ocean anymore because of too many waves. Same thing. It's like too many details might cloud the mind. So I will purposely not go into detail now, because this was already done for all the opening chapters of the book. My idea is to present the structure, the inner logic of the book, so that you can follow easily and always come back to this structure as an orientation. So these teachings now, recorded on video, are not intended to replace the curriculum. This is the necessary in-depth study. This is the real intention of the author, to really explain fully the things. And it is also not intended now to set you in a particularly meditative mood with meditative guided instructions. So, this book originated in the 16th century, 400 years after Gampopa's parinirvana, after he left his body. Most of you might know that Gampopa was the teacher to the first Karmapa and he was the teacher to Mahamudra, who then had further disciples, and all the Kaji schools actually see Gampopa as their forefather. And in those 4 centuries of development after Gampopa, the Mahamudra practice spread widely all over Tibet. Many monasteries were founded, many yogic settlements, many practitioners, and all the Tibetan traditions had well settled, and they had time to discuss points of divergence. So around that time, we believe that Dakpotashi Namgyal wrote this book either in 1565 or in 1577, depending on which one of these Tibetan years it was. During that time, a debate had been going on between the Sakya tradition and the Kagyu tradition mainly, about if it is possible to teach Mahamudra without integrating the Mahamudra practice into a tantric path. That was the main issue. And Dakpotashi Namgyal found that it was time to answer completely, thoroughly to the questions raised by other teachers, especially by Sakya Pandita long time ago and his students. And so part of this book is actually directed at outsiders of the Kagyu lineage. So it's an explanation of the Kagyu Mahamudra, not only understandable to insiders, but also to outsiders, those who have not had a personal direct contact with the Kagyu master, receiving the oral instructions, just by reading. It should be clear enough. And this makes this book a very lucid, very clear, very easy to understand manual. And Dakpotashi Namgyal, besides his incredible realization and learning, actually is very capable of explaining these points. Not only was he born into the family lineage of Gampopa, he was a distant relative of the same lineage of Gampopa, but actually his presence, his realization, and his knowledge were such that he is thought to be the first reincarnation of Gampopa after the gap of 400 years. So this for the Kagyu lineage or for his students was very clear because they could not see actually a difference between the two. There was the same teaching coming from his mouth, the same presence as with Gampopa. And he himself seems to have had reminiscences also of past lives. He was the 14th abbot, the Dharma master of Dakla Gampo, the monastery that Gampopa had founded, above which Gampopa had lived in the caves. Gampopa never entered the monastery to stay there. This was for the practitioners. He always lived in a cave. And as the 14th holder of the seat of Dakla Gampo, he was taught by his uncle, the 13th holder of the Dharma master seat of this monastery. And this uncle was called Gampo Choje, so the Dharma master of Gampo, Sonam Lindrup, which is the name of this great master that educated him in the Mahamudra teachings. And it seems that Dakpotashi Namgyal had come into this life with the task to clarify the Mahamudra teachings of Gampopa to the present time, to the time at the end of the 16th century. And he wrote 3 major books: the sun rays, the jewel light rays, and the moonbeams, each clarifying a different aspect of the teaching. The sun rays, they talk about the tantric practice based on the Hevaja Tantra. The jewel light rays, they explain overall the Vajrayana approach, and these moonbeams that we are going to talk about, they clarify the Mahamudra teaching without the Vajrayana. So please don't think that Dakpotashi Namgyal would be a Mahamudra master not entering the Vajrayana. He was actually a complete Vajrayana practitioner, completely into it, passing on these teachings, but wishing to communicate the essence Mahamudra. That's the good way of describing this approach. The idea is not that this Mahamudra approach would be stripped bare of the Vajrayana and then we have the real Mahamudra, but it is the continuation of the pointing out instructions of the Indian Mahasiddhas, who were also all practicing the Tantric approach. But this pointing out instructions would not rely on deity practice, on visualizing oneself as the Yidam deity. So this is the idea of this book, and Dakpotashi Namgyal in this way defines the Kaji Mahamudra approach, just like also the 8th Karmapa, Mikyo Dorje, had very well done. The two have to be seen together. And he gives to the oral transmission of that time a reference text, an easily understandable reference text with a gradual approach and pointing out instructions. And at the same time, it seems that he has actually managed to finish the debate between the Sakyapas and the Kajipas. Afterwards, there is no more record of a debate, of a big debate. The points were clear, because finally someone had taken the necessary time to go to the depths of the issue. And for us, another 400 years later, then we are so lucky to have that book. We are not engaged in any debate with anyone, we just want to understand the Mahamudra. And that's why I'm so motivated to pass the understanding on of this book, because it has helped me a great deal to explain the Mahamudra. It was not so crucial for me to know this very book to realize Mahamudra, but it was very helpful, and it is still very helpful to explain it, to know why certain aspects of Mahamudra are explained exactly that way. To give you a very important example, why is there such a great insistence on practicing shamatha and vipassana always as one? Not to separate shamatha and vipassana, not to separate mental calm from insight practice. This is a crucial point of Kaji Mahamudra, and it's very well explained in this book. And for myself, it was like listening to my teacher Genu Rinpoche after he had already passed away, because we managed to start to study this transmission just towards the end of the life of Genu Rinpoche, and continued with Khenpo Chodrak for some time after. And hearing the Tibetan words of how the Dhamma was explained actually was just like listening to Genu Rinpoche. So for me personally, it was very inspiring. Then there is a little anecdote also. When I received my monk vows, I remember Gene Rinpoche was sitting in front of us with the names of the monks that were to be ordained, and he had written the names before the ceremony. But when he came to me, he did not just take the name which was on top, he was searching. And he gave me the name of Sonam Lindrup. The teacher of Dakpo Tashi Namgyal had this name, and it was, wow, it was a big thing later on to discover that connection, because also Gene Rinpoche had asked me to translate the jewel ornament of Gampopa and other works. So actually in my practice I have developed this very strong connection with Gampopa's transmission of teaching, and have been very, very inspired by this master. Also with the life story of having been a doctor and having been married and then a monk, although that didn't last very long. But anyhow, it is the continuation of that kind of blessing, of that kind of commitment to the Mahamudra lineage that made me say, let's give that teaching, let's teach this book, no matter how few students will come to listen to the teaching. Even if just 10 had come or 20, I would have given the teaching. But now they have increased. Okay, so I encourage you very much to get that book, put your nose into it, and then listen to the audio recordings of the curriculum, where you will get more of the instructions on how to meditate with it.